along with Commander Subhash Datta. And over the next 30 minutes, Commander Subhash Datta and me would cover everything about Log4j and the vulnerability and what is its impact and what are the defenses that you can all do. But prior to that, I just want to spend maybe a couple of minutes on Sequretek as an organization. Our vision is to simplify security by consolidating the technology landscape. Anand Naik and Pankit Desai co-founded Sequretek in 2013. So we are about 8.5 years young organization. Anand Naik was the earlier managing director and CEO of Symantec Asia. And prior to that, he was the technical director for Symantec Asia. He was also in IBM and Sun prior to him starting Sequretek along with Pankit. Pankit Desai was the president for Rolta, and he was responsible for foraying from the services side of the business to the IP-led businesses in Rolta. He was the president there. And prior to that, he had been in Entity Data, IBM, and Wipro. Both Pankit and Anand are first-generation entrepreneurs, and our vision is to make this a global entity in cybersecurity. Arvind Bogarappu is the CTO, comes from McAfee, and he was there for over 20 years, and he's our CTO. Sequretek has actually won tremendous recognitions over the last few years. Some of the top ones is what I want to call out. Analytics Insight 2021 called us the top 100 cybersecurity startups. The Financial Times also called us the top 500 high growth companies in Asia Pacific region. NASSCOM 2021, as recent as a couple of days ago, gave us an award calling Emerging Company or Emerge 50 Product Company of the Year. Government of India also gave us an award of a national startup. There was an event called RAISE, RAISE, AI standing for Artificial Intelligence. RAISE 2020 AI Tech Winner Award from over 50,000 participants and from over 100 countries. We also were awarded the most valuable player, FIS in FinTech Venture Center. All these recognitions have happened because of the wonderful cybersecurity certified and specialists in our organization. We have more than 400 plus cybersecurity professionals working with us. And in the next slide, Commander Subhash Datta will also talk about the researchers that are there. We have two types of researchers. One is, of course, the malware research, which he will talk about. We also have data scientists who work in the pure AI research in Bangalore. While we are headquartered in Mumbai, we have offices in Bangalore, we have offices in Gurgaon, and we have offices in New Jersey. And we have customers all over the world, over 120 plus enterprise customers across India, US, Europe, and Asia Pacific countries, as well as the Middle East and Africa. As recent as about a couple of months ago, ICSA Labs, who test our products out across from a detection perspective and a response perspective, and also how we remove all the false positives, gave us a 99.84% efficacy. As recent as, again, Gartner called us out as one of the 6 companies in the supply side who use the AI extremely well in all our technologies of XDR and EDR. So that's what Sequretek is all about. Requesting Commander Subhash Datta to talk about our malware research and other analysis.
Yeah, hi, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So taking on from Uday's very brief introduction, one of the key business units that we have at Sequretek is the Malware Analysis Lab, which contributes both to our product development intelligence as well as to our Security Operations Center, which runs our XDR solution. So the intelligence which is converted from a curated feed of around 85 plus sources, as well as paid, as well as open source sources, which help us generate a huge amount of intelligence data bank. We have a large repository of malware samples, which are automatically, analyzed in an automated manner, as well as manually analyzed whenever the need requires. We feed this input, this intelligence to both our, like I said, both our products, which is XDR, as well as on the EDR component.
Thank you, Commander Subhash Datta. I'd like to start on the topic of Apache Log4j vulnerability. Let me give you an overview across 2 slides. Apache Log4j is a very easy to exploit, and it enables an attacker to gain full control of the affected servers. Log4j is an open source, Java-based logging utility widely used by enterprise applications and cloud services. This vulnerability is followed as CVE 2021-44228 with a 10 CVSS severity score. Commander, if you could just push it to the end. Thank you. Due to the release of proof of concept in public, the attackers are now able to exploit this vulnerability far more easier than ever before. Successful exploitation of this vulnerability could allow for arbitrary code execution within the context of the systems and services that use the Java logging library, including many of the services and applications written in Java. The privileges associated with the systems and services, the attacker can look at that and then install, view, change, or delete the data. The attacker can also create a new user with all administrative rights. Now, if these systems and services have been configured to have fewer user rights, exploitation of this vulnerability could have been having less impact than if they were configured with administrative rights. Now, as I told you, the attacker can now create a new user with all the administrative rights. So that's the first thing that we have to keep in mind. The second thing is that to fix this vulnerability of CVE 2021-4428, there was a mitigation to update to latest patch 2.15.0. But it was found that even after updating to the latest patch of 2.15.0, it was not enough. The fix to CVE 2021-4428 with patch 2.15.0 was incomplete in certain non-default configurations. The new vulnerability followed as CVE 2021-45046 with 9.0 CVSS severity score. So the severity score between 10 on the previous side as well as on this one with 9 is a tremendous severity on a scale of 1 to 10. Now, due to this vulnerability, the attacker can actually get control over the threat context map, as we call it as MDC, input data when the logging configuration uses non-default pattern layout with either a context lookup or a thread context map pattern, and craft a malicious input data using the JNDI lookup pattern, which would result in the denial of services attack. Now, what one has to remember is that this new vulnerability which has been observed, which could lead to a denial of services or DOS attack, as we call it, that was assigned CVE 2021-45105 with 7.5 CVSS score. So the version affected with CVE 2021-45105 is in all versions from 2.0 beta 9 all the way to 2.16.0. So when the logging configuration uses a non-default pattern layout with a context lookup, attackers can control using the thread context map or MDC input, and the data can craft malicious input data that contains a recursive lookup, resulting in a Stack Overflow error that will terminate the process and result in a DOS attack. To talk about more technical details, I request Commander Datta to take over.
So taking on from Uday's description of the vulnerability, like he said, 44228 remote code execution vulnerability exists in the Java naming and directory interface, JNDI. And how the JNDI or how Log4j interprets the commands which include this reference lookup. So one of the key functions which are built into this library, the Log4j library, is a lookup substitution. So the moment there is a command which is prefaced by this $sign and then with the curly bracket start, it is a command to start the lookup function of this library. Thereafter, the attacker can include these parameters in the header itself, and then ask the vulnerable component of this logging library to look up or reference the attacker controlled systems. Like Uday mentioned, this fix, which was this version upgrade to address the vulnerabilities in 44228, was not considered sufficient, and therefore Apache came up with another version and then designated a new vulnerability 45046. This again, however, on 18th of December was also not found sufficient because it led to a denial of service attack in certain non-default configurations. The details of these two vulnerabilities or details of these two CVEs are not known at the moment. So therefore, we do have a window of respite. But I am sure that given a period of time and given the tenacity of the attackers, this will come out subsequently in some days in the future. So how does the attack flow? How does the whole process takes place? The attacker sends a JDNI lookup in the header field, like I said. So any application that takes input from a user, say for example, a web application which is taking in the user credentials, username and password, etc. So instead of the input fields, the attacker enters these details, that is the JDNI colon LDAP, and then gives the attacker controlled address of the system. The attackers can also, and we have observed that attackers can also nest these queries so that they can run further commands. They can run a curl command, or they can run a wget command to directly download a malicious sample. The next step is that this string is then passed by this target server to the Log4j for logging purposes. And the moment the lookup reference is received by the Log4j library, it then parses this. It sends an LDAP request to an LDAP server, which is controlled by the attacker. The attacker then responds with the directory information, which contains a malicious Java class, which is then downloaded and executed on the target server, thereby giving complete control of this target server to the attacker. So at our security operations center, which runs SOC as well as our malware analysis lab with its network of honeypots spread across our offices, what is it that we have seen so far? So like Uday mentioned, this is a very large attack surface vulnerability. Since Log4j library is an open source library and it enables logging in the most painless method, at least until so far it has been discovered. Almost all web-based or systems which require input from or which require logging on their systems use this component of the library to enable the logging in their systems rather than rewriting the whole logging code by themselves. What they do is they import this library. So therefore, starting from Amazon Web Services to Minecraft to Cisco systems, the list is huge, and every day you will see these references on the web. There are very good resources on the GitHub, which are populated by the US CISA organization, as well as our CERT India is also coming up with these advisories on a very regular basis. So therefore, please go through these, have an idea of what is it that is there within your environment and how does it affect you. What we are also seeing is at the moment, these are not attacks which enable remote access to a very great extent. What we are seeing surprisingly are scanning attempts, or at the most installation of crypto miners. In fact, one of those crypto miners binaries that we were able to access had a very polite note in front of it. The whole the file itself had a very polite note for the security researchers, saying that this is not going to cause any harm. This is just going to utilize some resources of your system. Please allow this to work and let me earn some money. So this is one aspect. The other aspect that we are seeing is recruiting these vulnerable systems as part of the botnets. And access brokers have also gotten into the game now. Access brokers are these variety of attackers which harvest just the credentials, user credentials, and then they sell these user credentials to somebody who's looking to utilize this or abuse this user credentials for their further gain. What we have also seen are evidence of remote access Trojans in the form of Cobalt Strike binaries, Metapredators, or Mimikatz. So Mimikatz gives us an idea that yes, credential harvesting is going on for the purpose of lateral movement subsequently. And we can only guess that ransomware is going to be the next wave in this whole process. As per the Microsoft Threat Intelligence Center, there is some evidence of state-sponsored activity. And again, this is limited to just scanning vulnerable systems, probably making an inventory or making a data bank of where all vulnerable systems exist. What are the organizations behind these vulnerable systems and how strategically important these organizations are. So this state-sponsored activity, as per Microsoft, originates from China, Iran, North Korea, and Turkey.
I'd like to talk about the indicators of compromise, or IOCs as we call it. This exhaustive list of IOCs are embedded in an advisory document that Sanket, who is moderating this call, does it in two ways. One is, if any of you are interested in getting these advisories, which comes out every Tuesday from Commander Datta's team or our malware research team, please subscribe to that. We also put it up in LinkedIn, and you could follow us on Sequretek handle there and pick up these advisories, which happen on multiple topics, including ransomware, targeted attacks, the various patches that Microsoft has released and things like that. And even this particular presentation, as well as the advisories related to this, we have 4 versions of Log4j itself, which has come out. You can get that from Sanket and from the marketing team. So essentially, the exhaustive list of IOCs are embedded in an advisory document, and that will be shared with all of you in this webinar. And so reach out to info@securetek.com. Could you go back to the previous slide, sir? So I'd like to talk about indicators of compromise. Would cover IP addresses, URLs, domains, file hash SHA-256, the binary retrieval and execution commands. Next slide, please. So some of these sample indicators of compromise, you can see some of the addresses, the IP addresses that Commander Subhash Datta spoke about, the URLs, the domains, and the binary retrievals. Just stay with it for a minute so that you can kind of look at this list. It's an exhaustive list, but there will be more in the advisory that we are talking about. Over to you, Datta.
So what is it that you need to defend yourself? What actions can you take? The first and foremost in all scenarios of security is to discover what is it that is affected within your environment. What are your internet facing assets which allow data inputs? And more importantly, out of these systems, how many of them use the Log4j Java library anywhere in its stack? It could be as part of your internal build process, or it could be part of an OEM solution which has got this Log4j Java library. There are tools available, like I gave a mention of the GitHub repository, which is available and freely widely publicized. They have tools available for you to carry out this process of discovery within your environment. Apart from the internet-facing systems in your DMZ, you must also do an asset inventory of all your internal systems. Because as I spoke earlier, we have seen evidences of Mimikatz being dropped and other credential harvesting tools being dropped. We assess with a great degree of confidentiality that the next stage is a ransomware with its ability to do a lateral movement within your organization. So anywhere internally, even if their systems are not internet facing and they do use this Log4j library, you must discover them and inventorize these systems. The next step is definitely update the Log4j advisories that are being issued by Apache. Update these binaries. Apache advises that do not download the binaries themselves, but you must build these binaries. So please get in touch with your application or system developers or system maintainers to do this process for you. Isolate the affected systems, and any system which has been internet facing and has not been discovered by your teams for the last 3 to 4 days, you must assume that they are already compromised and they are already in somebody's data bank of compromised systems or vulnerable systems. The next stage, of course, is to identify common post-exploit activity within your organization or within your infrastructure. Hunt for the malicious activity. One of the most critical aspects is to hunt for any web-related requests which are coming to your systems, and look for those keywords which are indicative of lookup references to the Log4j library. Look for outbound communications, unnatural or unforeseen outbound communications going through, say, for example, as a DNS query, but the packet size is more than what is normally the case for a DNS query, or an outbound RMI or LDAP requests. RMI is the remote method invocation, which is something similar to the older RPC calls that we used to see. However, this is in the context of an object-oriented system. Any DMZ systems which are initiating outbound connections, they are not responding to incoming connections, but they are initiating these outbound connections. And most of these outbound connections, or any of these outbound connections, are directed towards those malicious IPs which are included in the indicator of compromise list that will be shared with you post this webinar. Some of the other preventive action that you can take, these are of course generic, but they are also very specific to this particular scenario. The first thing is to block all these IOCs in the corresponding security devices. Perimeter security devices are the first line of defense in any IT infrastructure, and all these IOCs which are indicated in this advisories must be blocked at the perimeter. That is the first stage. And in any case, like they mentioned, these are already these indicators of compromise are already included or in our threat intelligence feed and our malware intelligence feed, which is integrated into our XDR. So all our customers which are already on our XDR are proactively protected against this specific threat. The another issues that you can do, and these are all generic security guidelines. I will not emphasize this too much. Content scanning, updating of operating systems to the latest versions, ensuring that your anti-malware protection is absolutely programmed to do an automated scan at regular intervals, and of course user awareness on not opening any emails or not opening any attachments from untrusted sources and from unwarranted sources. It could be that the user's name or the sender's name has been spoofed, which is a fairly trivial activity. But in case you are not expecting this particular email, please do not respond to this. This user awareness is an ongoing process, and it is emphasized that this should be always exercised. I hand you over to Sanket now, who will take on the rest of the proceedings. Sanket, over to you.
Thanks, Subhash sir. So that was thanks for this insightful session around the Log4j vulnerability. I am very sure that the enterprises attending this webinar, this session would help them in safeguarding themselves from the Log4j vulnerability. I'd now like to open the stage to our audience for any of the queries that they may have on this session. So they can either use the chat box to type in the queries, or they could raise their hands and I can allow them to speak and ask their query. So yeah, so we have Satish, who is allowed to speak. Hi, Satish.
Hi. Will this suggestions provided by the vulnerabilities patch management will fix this temporary issues, like if anything malware attacks over a network?
So this is an ongoing activity. As you can see, Apache has already rolled out 3 versions which take into account the same vulnerability in its different forms and different permutation combinations. At the moment, as of 18th December, the last update to the Log4j is 2.17 for people using, for organizations which are on Java 8. So we would recommend that, yes, as of now, the vulnerabilities which have been disclosed and vulnerabilities which Apache is aware of and the rest of the security community is aware of, this should address the vulnerabilities which arise from this the previous versions of Log4j library. So please update to the existing versions. Ask your
And all our McAfees were updated with latest stats. So will that be okay, or apart from that, we need to do this also?
So yes, endpoint protection or anti-malware protection systems, like I said, they need to be updated. Almost all of the security vendors, including our own EDR, they have been updated. Yes, to detect this malicious activity or to detect any activity which is targeting this vulnerability. So what happens in the normal case is that the moment a vulnerability comes up, the attackers first of all try to discover what all are the vulnerable systems. And the moment they get those vulnerable systems, then they see, how do I, leverage this? How do I, send an exploit code to this particular system? So all security device or security applications or security systems, including perimeter security systems, are as of now updated to detect activities which are related to this specific vulnerability.
Thank you, Tata sir. Thank you.
Most welcome.
Thank you, Satish. So there are a couple more questions. One has come around the Log4j 1.2.17. Is Log4j 1.2.17 vulnerable to these latest CVE, and how could we upgrade to Log4j API 2.*? So that is one of the questions that has come.
Yeah. So Log4j version 1 has already been, Apache has advised. I won't say that it has been deprecated as such. It is still in use in organizations, and Apache does provide support to this. But it is recommended to at least upgrade to Log4j version 2, and version 2.17 is the one which is latest. I assume that your question refers to the Log4j version 1. And as of now, version 1, as per Apache, is not vulnerable to these specific vulnerabilities, because this functionality was not built into the Log4j version 1. It has only come with version 2 onwards. I believe Pankit, our CEO, is also on this call and would like to take this further.
Pankit sir, you are there?
No. Okay. All right.
No, he's not.
So the other question is on, has Microsoft released any patches for mitigating this vulnerability? So Microsoft has released patches for applications which are, which use their the Log4j components. Majority of, and it would be, a matter of surprise to some users or some members of this audience, that a large amount of the infrastructure which Microsoft uses for their cloud infrastructure, for their Azure environment, uses Linux-based systems. So any Linux-based systems, since Apache is directly integrated with the Linux-based systems, it does also integrate with Windows-based systems, but it is an easier transition to that. And if those systems use the Log4j versions or Log4j libraries for logging requirements, then yes, they would be vulnerable, and Microsoft has released patches which mitigate this vulnerability. Microsoft has internally patched their Azure systems, which is what the latest blog post from the Microsoft Threat Intelligence team comes out. So for their users, desktops systems or user-based server systems, they have not released patches specifically for this vulnerability as such. It is more of a process of discovery. If your application, which is hosted on an Microsoft Windows server version, has it does employ this particular library to do its logging process, then yes, you need to update that application itself.
So
does it affect?
question, yeah.
Yes. So does it affect any other applications released by Microsoft, SQL and SCCM? Again, it is a question of discovery. I don't believe that most of the Microsoft applications as such, which are purely Windows-based systems, they use an open source library for their logging purposes. Majority of that would be an internal process, or an internal library or internal function, or developed by Microsoft itself, which would use the logging capabilities, which is replicated in Log4j. But in any case, as of now, as of today, Microsoft has not released any additional patches apart from what they released on that patch Tuesday.
I don't think there are any more questions coming up. We can go to the next slide, Subhash. So yeah, thanking you all for joining this particular webinar. We hope it would help you and your organization to safeguard yourself against this vulnerability. Like mentioned earlier, we'll be sharing the advisory document with all of the attendees so that they could execute what are the best practices, the preventive measures that are mentioned in the advisory, and they could have a look over the IOCs in the particular advisory. To access any additional cyber threat advisories that we release every week, so once or twice every week, you could visit our website. You could go to the resources tab, to the downloadables, and then to the cyber threat advisory. You could see many cyber threat advisories uploaded over there. In case you like to subscribe for the advisories, you need these advisories to be directly sent out to your corporate email IDs. You could drop an email on info@sequretek.com. So we'll be happy to add you to the mailing list. So thanking you all again.
Thank you.